There are places in this world where the old laws still apply. Not the laws of man or physics, but the laws of the ancient world. On the lonely stretches of desert highway or in the dark, dirt floor basements of our ancestors' homes, there are things that demand to be let in, and there are things that demand to be chased. Tonight, we have a collection of feature-length accounts involving skinwalkers, mimics, and creatures that defy explanation. These are the stories of the nights when the barrier between the human world and the other world broke. Hello everyone, and welcome back to True Haunting Log. Tonight, we are presenting the director's cut of terrifying encounters sent in by our viewers. We are traveling from the Navajo Nation to the rural farmlands of Ohio and into the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest. Find a safe place. Check the locks on your doors. And if you want to support the channel, please hit that like button. Also, remember that if you have experienced something unexplainable, you can submit your stories to us at truehauntinglog@gmail.com to be featured in a future video. Now, let's begin. Story 1. Officer Encounter on the Res, submitted by Officer Keith. I was a tribal police officer on the Navajo Reservation for 10 years. The Res is a different world. It's vast, beautiful, and ancient. But when the sun goes down, the desert changes. The shadows stretch out, and the silence becomes heavy. I've seen a lot of strange things out there, lights in the sky, animals behaving in ways they shouldn't, things that most people wouldn't believe. But this one stands out above the rest. It is the reason I don't patrol at night anymore. It was a quiet Tuesday night. The kind of night where the radio is dead silent, just the low hum of static keeping me company. I was patrolling a remote stretch of highway near the Four Corners area. There hadn't been a car for hours. Just me, the black asphalt, and the endless sea of sagebrush illuminated by my headlights. Around 2 a.m., my fatigue was starting to set in. I was sipping lukewarm coffee, trying to stay alert. Then, I saw something. In the middle of the road ahead, right on the center line. I slowed down, tapping the brakes, and reached up to turn on my spotlight. The beam cut through the darkness. At first glance, it looked like a large dog or a coyote sitting in the middle of the lane, possibly injured. But as I rolled closer, the shape resolved itself. It wasn't a dog. It was a man. He was wearing a coyote skin, draped over him like a grotesque cloak. He was crouching on all fours, his knuckles pressed into the asphalt, mimicking the posture of a beast. He was staring right at me. Even from this distance, I could see he had paint on his face and body streaks of white and black clay that looked like skeletal markings. I stopped the cruiser about 20 feet away. I turned on my overhead lights. The red and blue strobes washed over the figure, creating a disorienting, strobe light horror show. I grabbed the radio mic for the PA system. My voice boomed out into the empty desert, echoing off the rocks. "This is the police. You need to move off the roadway immediately." He didn't budge. He didn't flinch at the lights or the sound. He just stared at me with these intense, pitch-black eyes. They looked like shark eyes dead, flat, and devoid of humanity. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I put the car in park and unholstered my weapon. I stepped out of the car, keeping the heavy door between me and him as a shield. "Sir, you need to clear the roadway," I yelled, hand on the grip of my pistol. He slowly stood up. The movement was wrong. It was too fluid, unnatural. He unfolded himself until he was standing at his full height. He was tall, well over 6 feet, looming in the strobe lights. He still had the coyote skin draped over his head and shoulders, the snout of the dead animal resting on his forehead like a mask. He smiled at me. It was the most evil smile I've ever seen. It stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. Then he started to chant. It was a low, guttural sound. It vibrated in the air. It was a language I didn't recognize, even though I speak fluent Navajo. It sounded ancient, pre-human. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. He dropped his head, and then he started running towards me. He moved with incredible speed, faster than any human should be able to run. He covered the 20 feet in a heartbeat. I raised my weapon and fired 2 warning shots into the asphalt. The gunshots cracked like thunder in the silence. He didn't stop. He didn't even blink. I took aim at his chest center mass and fired. The recoil kicked my hand. I know I hit him. I saw the dust fly off the coyote skin where the bullet impacted. I saw him flinch backward, but he didn't go down. There was no blood. He kept coming. He started laughing maniacally, a wet, gurgling sound. I jumped back into the cruiser and slammed the door just as he reached it. A massive fist slammed against the window. The glass cracked under the force of the blow. Ugh. He was screaming at me now, his face pressed against the safety glass. Yi Naud Lushi. His eyes were shifting. I watched them change color in the strobe lights from black to red to a sickly, glowing yellow. I threw the car in reverse and floored it. The tires screeched, burning rubber. I spun the car around, the cruiser fishtailing violently, and took off down the highway. I pushed the engine to the limit. 80 miles per hour. 90 miles per hour. 100 miles per hour. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see him left behind in the dust. But I saw him. He was running after the car. He was keeping up with me on foot. He was loping along the highway, his coyote skin flapping in the wind, a rictus grin on his face. He chased me for about 5 miles. 5 miles at 100 miles per hour. Finally, he veered off into the desert, disappearing into the sagebrush like smoke. I drove straight to the station. I didn't stop for stop signs. I didn't stop for anything. I filed a report, my hands shaking so hard I could barely type. My sergeant came out and looked at the cruiser. He looked at the spiderweb crack in the reinforced glass. He looked at the deep dents in the metal door. He didn't ask many questions. He just looked at me with tired, knowing eyes. Go home, Keith. Get some rest. We both knew what it was. We didn't say the name out loud. A Skinwalker. I transferred to a different department a month later. I moved to the city. I couldn't work those roads at night anymore. Because I know that out there, in the dark, the laws of physics don't apply. Story 2. The Thing in the Basement, submitted by Scaredy Cat. I live in an old farmhouse in Ohio. The house has been in my family for generations. It smells of old wood and history. It has a dirt floor basement that we mostly use for storage canning jars, old tools, things we forget about. It's a damp, cold place that always feels unwelcoming. One night, there was a bad thunderstorm. The rain was lashing against the windows like gravel, and the wind was howling around the eaves. The power went out with a loud pop, plunging the house into pitch blackness. I was alone. I was in the living room with a flashlight, trying to read a book to distract myself from the storm. The silence of the house, underneath the noise of the storm, was heavy. Then, I heard a noise. It was coming from the kitchen, specifically from the basement door. I heard a rhythmic rapping sound. It sounded like someone knocking from the other side, from the inside of the basement. I froze. My blood turned cold. There is no outside entrance to the basement. The only way in or out is the door in the kitchen. So whoever or whatever was knocking had to be down there. They had to have been down there the whole time. I thought maybe it was an animal. Maybe a raccoon had gotten in through a window or a vent. But the knocking was rhythmic. It was intelligent. 3 distinct knocks. A pause. 3 more knocks. It was polite. Huh. Like a guest asking to come in. I grabbed a heavy wooden baseball bat I kept by the couch. I walked slowly to the kitchen, my flashlight beam shaking in the dark. I stood 10 feet from the white wooden door. "Who's there?" I yelled, trying to sound brave, but my voice cracked. The knocking stopped instantly. Silence. Then, a voice spoke from behind the door. "Let me out." It was a whisper, raspy and dry, like dead leaves dragging on concrete. "It's cold down here. Let me out." The voice sounded vaguely familiar, scratching at the back of my memory. "Who are you?" I asked, gripping the bat tighter. "It's me, Grandpa. Let me out, boy." My heart stopped. My grandfather had been dead for 5 years. We buried him. I saw him in the casket. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty house. "You're not my grandfather," I said, my voice trembling uncontrollably. The voice laughed. It wasn't a warm, grandfatherly laugh. It was a cold, cruel, metallic sound. "Smart boy. Now let me out before I break this door down." The demeanor changed instantly. The doorknob started to rattle violently. The metal clattered against the plate. The door shook in its frame, dust falling from the jamb. Something massive was throwing itself against the wood from the other side. Ugh. I backed away, raising the bat, terrified the latch would give way. "Go away," I screamed. "You're not welcome here." The rattling stopped. Then I heard scratching. A slow, deliberate scraping sound. On the wood of the door. Like long, hard claws dragging deep grooves into the timber. It was testing the wood. I didn't wait. I ran out of the house, into the storm. I didn't care about the rain or the lightning. I got in my car, hands shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. I drove to my friend's house in town and refused to leave. I stayed there for 3 days until the power came back on. When I finally went back home, I didn't go alone. I brought my friend and his dad, both armed with shotguns. We went into the kitchen. The basement door was still closed, but there were deep, jagged scratch marks all over the inside of the door. Shreds of wood littered the floor. We went down into the basement with flashlights and guns raised. It was empty. No intruder, no animal. But in the center of the dirt floor, there was a pile. a pile of bones. Small animal bones, mostly rabbits, squirrels, and birds picked completely clean. And sitting on top of the pile was my grandfather's old pocket watch. The gold one. The one he was buried with 5 years ago. I don't know how it got there. And I don't know what was in my basement wearing his voice. Story 3. The Climber. I'm a trail runner. It's not just a hobby for me, it's a lifestyle. I live in Oregon, a place where the green is so deep it feels like you're underwater. I run in a state park near my house, a heavily wooded area dominated by ancient, towering Douglas fir trees that block out the sky. These trees are massive, some of them hundreds of years old, creating a canopy so dense that, even at noon, it feels like twilight on the forest floor. I usually run in the early morning, right before work, when the mist is still clinging to the ferns and the air is crisp and cold. It's usually the most peaceful part of my day. Just the rhythm of my breath, the crunch of pine needles under my shoes, and the solitude. One morning, I was about 3 miles into my run. I was deep in the park, far from the trailhead, on a single-track path that wound up the side of a ridge. It was misty, a thick gray fog that dampened all sound. The world felt small, reduced to the 10 feet of visibility in front of me. My breathing was steady. Suddenly, the rhythm of the forest broke. I heard a strange sound coming from directly above me. The sound of heavy wood splintering. It sounded like heavy branches breaking under a significant weight. Not a squirrel, not a bird. Something heavy. I stopped running, my chest heaving, the steam of my breath mixing with the fog. I looked up into the canopy, straining my eyes against the gray light. High up in a massive fir tree, maybe 50 feet off the ground, I saw something moving against the dark bark. It was a large creature, and it was climbing down the trunk. But it wasn't climbing like a bear or a cougar, backing down cautiously with its rear end first. It was climbing head first, like a squirrel or a lizard. But it was the size of a man. I stood there, paralyzed, my brain unable to process the geometry of its movement. It moved with a fluid, sickening speed, its limbs sprawling out wide. It looked like a human, but the proportions were all wrong. It was naked, its skin a pale, sickly white that stood out against the dark moss of the tree. Its limbs were elongated, stretching too far. It seemed to have extra joints in its arms and legs, allowing it to flatten itself against the curve of the tree, hugging the bark. It scuttled down the wood, claws digging in with audible, rhythmic impacts. When it got to about 10 feet off the ground just above my head level, it stopped abruptly. It froze. Then, it rotated its head 180 degrees to look at me. It had a flat face. No nose bridge. Just wide-set eyes that glowed with a faint, bioluminescent sheen in the dim morning light. It opened its mouth. It hissed at me. A wet, aggressive sound, exposing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. That broke my trance. Adrenaline dumped into my system like ice water. I turned and sprinted back down the trail. I ran harder than I have ever run in my life. Behind me, I heard a heavy thud. It had dropped the last 10 feet. Then I heard it. The sound of rapid movement on the forest floor. It was running after me, but it wasn't running on 2 legs. It sounded like it was galloping on all fours, its hands and feet slapping the dirt in a chaotic, rapid rhythm. It was making noises. Strange, insect-like clicking and chirping sounds that echoed in the mist. I didn't look back. I knew if I looked back, I would trip over a root, and if I tripped, I was dead. I just focused on the trail ahead, leaping over rocks, dodging low-hanging branches that whipped my face. My lungs burned, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The clicking was getting closer. It was faster than me. I saw the trailhead ahead. The gray asphalt of the parking lot was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I burst out of the tree line, fumbled for my keys, and threw myself into my car. I slammed the door and locked it in one motion. I jammed the key in the ignition and started the engine. As I peeled out, gravel spraying everywhere, I looked in the rearview mirror. The creature was standing at the edge of the woods. It had stopped right at the boundary line where the pavement met the dirt. It stood up on two legs, its long, pale arms hanging down to its shins. It watched me go, its wide eyes unblinking. Then, slowly, deliberately, it turned around. It walked to the nearest tree and began to climb back up. Effortlessly, it disappeared into the canopy in seconds. I haven't gone back to that park since. I stick to the treadmill now, because I know what's waiting in the tops of the trees. Story 4, The Sheep Man, submitted by Gabriel O. At the time of these events, I was only about 14 years old. I lived a sheltered life, never really venturing more than a few miles from my home. But one day, I felt the need for adventure. I lived near the flat, expansive marshlands of Alviso, my hometown. It's a place of reeds, mud, and silence, where the bay meets the land. It was around sunset when I ventured out. I was supposed to meet up with a few friends to explore what some refer to as a ghost town, an abandoned settlement slowly sinking into the bay. Keep in mind that up to that point in my life, I was never superstitious. Paranormal things were just for TV screens and campfires. But my friends never showed up. They flaked, leaving me alone at the edge of the swamp. So, I was left to venture on by myself, accompanied only by my small dog, Zero. I packed a backpack full of water and snacks, and I headed out into the fading light. I was walking through the woods that border the marsh, just doing what kids do, exploring, throwing rocks into the water. I found a small clearing in a particularly swampy area. I had always heard rumors of a hermit living in these woods. Supposedly, people had seen him here and there, a shadow in the reeds, but I was told no one ever got close. I didn't really believe it. I began to walk through this marshy area until, suddenly, I got a weird feeling in my gut. It was that primal sensation that you were being watched. The air grew heavy. I stopped and looked towards the sun. It was high noon in my memory, but the chill that came over me made it feel like midnight. It was alarming, to say the least. Zero, my dog, stopped panting. He tucked his tail between his legs and whined. I turned to see a figure looming in a dark, shadowed portion of the woods. My body turned to stone. I remember sheer panic rising up in my throat, choking me. My brain screamed, "Run," but my legs refused to comply. It was a figure, tall, dark. But the eyes were the creepiest part. They reminded me of topaz, yellow, hard, and glowing. They looked demonic. Soon, the petrification broke. I turned and ran back the way I came, dragging Zero with me. Mere seconds later, I could hear something behind me. The sound of branches snapping and water splashing. Something was stalking me through the reeds. I wasn't sure if it was hunting me, but I felt its gaze burning into my back as I ran. I'd never known such horror until that moment. I slept with the lights on for days. Years later, I told my dad about it. My dad and I used to cruise around in his truck and talk, away from my mother's ears. She didn't condone dark paranormal talk. She was deeply religious. He told me of a time when he was 17. He and his friends went out to a nature reserve in their hometown. They were teenagers, drinking beer and having fun under the moonlight. My dad was the designated driver, so he was sober. He told me the moon was high and bright, lighting up the woods like a spotlight. He was just cruising down the reserve road, taking his time. Suddenly, he saw an animal on the side of the road. It was very large. It was hunched over, eating some roadkill, a deer or a coyote. He stopped the vehicle to get a better look. The creature stopped eating. It slowly stood up and snapped its head around to meet his eyes. He said whatever it was stood about 7 feet tall. Ugh. He said it looked like a mix between a man and a wolf. A classic werewolf, or a Dogman. He was so scared that he ripped the truck into reverse, tires screeching, and floored it. He spun around and took off. But this creature, it didn't stay behind. It ran after him. My dad was doing about 60 miles per hour on a winding dirt road. He looked out his passenger window. The thing was right there. It was running alongside the truck, effortlessly keeping pace, staring at him through the glass. He thought he was going to die. Eventually, he made it back to the paved main road, and the creature peeled off into the woods. He said he felt like he never really lost it, like it marked him. That story shook me. And later on, when I was about 18, I think I encountered the same thing. I was out with a friend, hunting squirrel in the deep woods. We had had a successful morning. We had about 5 squirrels. We were carrying them back to our vehicle when suddenly we saw a blood trail. It was fresh, bright red against the leaves. Being morbid young adults, we followed the trail. It led us deeper into the brush. As soon as we came up to the end of the trail, sheer terror struck my face. I looked up. In a large oak tree, about 15 feet up, hanging from a thick branch, was the torso of a large deer. Just the torso. It wasn't hoisted by a rope. It was jammed into the fork of the tree. At first, I assumed some hunter was prepping the deer in an unorthodox fashion. But there were no ropes, no ladder stands. And no animal around here, not a mountain lion, not a bear, could drag a deer carcass that high into a tree. The body was far from clean. It was messy. It looked like it had almost exploded. Ribs were shattered outward. And there were obvious claw marks in the side of its torso, deep gouges that went through the bone. I looked over at my friend. He was panicking. His hands were shaking so bad he dropped his, 22 rounds in the dirt. He was trying to reload. Every time he spoke, he stuttered. His face was pale white. Seeing him act like that scared me more than the deer. I started to reload my weapon as well. The only other weapon we had was an old hatchet, and against whatever did that to a deer, a hatchet wasn't going to do much. We were miles from town. We hadn't seen anyone all day. So we ran. We ran the opposite way of the bloody trail. Then, we heard it. The snapping of heavy sticks behind us. Something heavy was pursuing us. We stumbled upon a small cave formation in the woods. And there, lying in front of the cave, was the other half of that deer. The legs, the head, torn apart. All either of us could feel at that moment was pure, primal fear. I tried telling my friend not to panic, but it was useless. We pointed our guns at the direction of the snapping sounds. We knew something was watching us from the tree line. Like fearful idiots, we began firing. The gunshots echoed loudly. We fired in random directions, shooting into the shadows, trying to kill whatever it was. We didn't think about safety. We just wanted to make noise. We wanted to fight back. When the ammunition was gone and the echo of the gunshots faded, silence. We heard a low growl. We turned and ran. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. Since that day, we have vowed never to tell anyone about it. Until now. Because I know what my dad saw. And I know what I saw. It's the same thing. And it's still out there, hanging deer in the trees. If you have a story you would like to share, be sure to send it to truehauntinglog@gmail.com. We read every single submission, and we want to help you tell your story. If these stories kept you awake tonight, please leave a like and a comment down below. Tell us, what is the one thing that would make you never go back into the woods? Don't forget to share this video with a friend and subscribe for more true horror. Thank you for listening. Lock your doors, check your windows, and have a good night.